It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. Michigan, like the rest of the country, has faced polarizing political winds. Because of all the disagreement, fewer policies are making it through the state legislature. But that doesn't mean political change isn't possible in the state. A major vehicle for policy change has been ballot initiatives, cannabis legalization, the end of gerrymandering, and the expansion of reproductive freedoms all were passed by ballot initiative over the last 8 years. And that leaves the question, why have so many ballot initiatives from the left failed to make it to the ballot this year? Already, the initiative for ranked choice voting, an effort to tax rich people to fund Michigan schools, and a campaign to create one minimum wage for Michiganders all failed to make it on the 2026 ballot. Why? And what does this say, if anything, about the state of liberals and the Democratic Party in Michigan? To discuss this, we have Colin Jackson here. He's the Capitol reporter for the Michigan Public Radio Network. Colin, welcome back.
Good morning, Robin.
Okay, so Colin, broadly speaking, got to ask this question first. Why did all these liberal ballot initiatives fail?
Well, I would say it's a matter of a combination of things. One is resources and just the amount of money that was going into these campaigns compared to in years past. When I was looking through, you had mentioned, Rank My Vote. You had mentioned a campaign to fund schools using taxes on some of the wealthier Michiganders. And you had mentioned the One Fair Wage ballot initiative, create the one minimum wage. Now, none of these campaigns were particularly well-resourced. I believe Invest in My Kids and their latest January campaign finance statement, they said they had around $239,000 by the end of that statement. In comparison, during some of the 2022 campaigns when we saw some massive liberal or left of center initiatives pass, those campaigns were pushing $1 million at times or pushing, multi-million dollars at certain times. So it's a matter of resources to hire people to go out, gather signatures, gather campaigns. I think there's a certain level of ambition versus urgency here where, in 2022, there was this feeling that, okay, there's rights going away. There's a sense of urgency that to protect the right to abortion in Michigan, you needed to pass the Reproductive Freedom for All initiative. Versus, right now, if you're trying to tax the higher earners to pay for schools, that's something that maybe a lot of folks left of center may want to see, but they may not necessarily see the same level of urgency there.
Okay, ambition versus urgency. So in other words, we've got a lot of different folks that are spreading out, breaking up resources. They're not coming together for one powerful campaign. We've got 3 different campaigns, so things are more fragmented. But then also it's more about making statements about values versus something existential, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely that idea of a value statement versus an existential statement. And I would say, to a certain extent, some of these campaigns did work together. A lot of times when I was out and about and I was approached by someone with, for example, an Invest in My Kids campaign, they were also carrying petitions for the Michiganders for money out of politics, which is still in this race in
right.
that petition.
I mean, that's the only one that's still in the race, right?
That is the only one that's still in the race. And I think another issue, too, that we didn't talk about is just timing, period, and when these campaigns got out in the field. For example, the Invest in My Kids petition, they didn't start gathering signatures till late summer last year. In Michigan, you only have 180 days to gather all the signatures you need. And so it starts to get cold out, late October, early November. And if you're relying mainly on volunteers and don't necessarily have that same paid signature gathering army that some of the other campaigns have had in years past, you're really limited in how much time you can just go out there and approach people on the street. If it's January and it's 10 degrees outside, are you trying to sit around in a Meijer parking lot signing signatures, or are you just trying to get into shopping and go back to your car?
Well, Colin, also, I mean, if someone's approaching me and it's 10 degrees outside or negative 10 degrees, I'm a lot less likely to notice them, even though I promise you I'm one of the people who wants to say hi to everyone on the street. But I'm a little more focused on running to my car or running to that next warm shelter.
Exactly. So it's a combination of things. And really, when you're relying on mainly volunteers, I see, especially after 2022, why you have an impulse to do that. Because we saw, signature fraudsters really just ruin a lot of campaigns back in the 2022 election cycle. That being said, having a professional signature gathering outfit, you may have your union partners, you may have your organization partners who are able to pay for their own signature gathering efforts through that way, um, it still might not necessarily make up for that same gap when it comes to having your own in-house paid operation too.
Let's break these down if we could, Colin, because they all have different leaders. I mean, why do you think ranked choice voting in particular failed?
I think Rank My Vote and that initiative had a lot of issues from the very beginning. For one, I don't know if it necessarily, we're looping this into this conversation about liberal left of center ballot initiatives. And I think that's because at times we've seen ranked choice voting in other places lead toward, more left of center candidates, most famously Zohran Mamdani in New York. Uh, at the same time, I don't necessarily know if this had broad support necessarily, even around Democrats. It really kind of felt early on like it was a ballot campaign without a full political home in Michigan or a true political home here in Michigan. And I think, that reflected in the fact that this was the first ballot initiative to pack up shop and say we're going to focus on 2028 instead.
As someone who covers politics, Colin, do you feel like ranked choice voting is just sort of unsexy? Like it's not necessarily easy to talk about. It's not something that people immediately understand. It feels like a lot of organizers fail to draw this important connection between how ranked choice voting could essentially help a democracy or the democratic process. Is that your assessment?
Yeah, I think that you're exactly right. It's something where it's hard to explain to people, especially if you have, just those few minutes when they're running errands or running groceries or approaching them at the park or something. It's hard to really summarize. It's something that even the local clerks of both parties were opposed to largely because they saw it as being more work for themselves, having to go through each ballot, count who was the fifth place, who was the fourth place, who was the third place, et cetera, kept reallocating those. There was a lot of easy opposition to those, too extreme, too confusing, or whatever the opponent's slogan would be. This even, demonstrated in some of the early election board meetings that we had around this when they were getting the petition in shape to go before voters. That debate over how to properly summarize it took hours.
Okay, and then there is a campaign that some folks would categorize as sexier than ranked choice voting, and that is Invest in My Kids, because it aimed to raise income taxes for people making more than $500,000 and to put that money toward education in the state. And so that was able to appeal to folks farther on the left who are saying eat the rich, but also it was appealing to a lot of education advocates who say like it's time to prioritize education in Michigan and take it to the next level in a way that we haven't done it before. So why do you think that one failed?
This is a campaign. I thought it was interesting when I saw that they weren't going to make it to the ballot because, to their credit, I did see them out and about. I saw them at the farmers markets. There were places where you would expect to see them that they weren't necessarily omnipresent the way like I said, we've seen in past campaigns, but they were out there. I think one of the issues is just a matter of campaign infrastructure. They had a coalition, they had their union support, they had their organizational support, their community organizational support. And I believe they told me they had around 3,000 volunteers by the end of it that they feel are really trained up and excited and ready to go for the 2028 election cycle. At the end of the day, when you have to gather around 446,000 signatures to make it to the ballot, and you have 3,000 volunteers, and that's something that you've built up over time. That's a lot of signatures each one of those volunteers is going to have to be able to bring in to make that ballot. And that's not even to mention, the cushion. A lot of times campaigns like to overshoot that 446,000 signature threshold just in case, some of them get thrown out or deemed invalids, people sign fake names or what have you. So I think that's one of the issues. And again, I think it's a matter of timing and just, again, when you start organizing, you start collecting ballots in August, that's a very short amount of time. You really need that full 6-month window here in Michigan to really do some damage when it comes to getting petition signatures. And then again, I think some of the major support too, that you didn't see the same level of major support either from a lot of elected lawmakers. You don't see the governor holding rallies in favor of this. And I think that's another issue too.
I wonder about public skepticism of institutions. I mean, our producer spoke with people who were organizing for this campaign, and people sometimes said to them that they were very skeptical of the campaign itself. So that has me wondering, do you think that's because there's lowered trust in the public education system right now, and so people don't want to put money, even if it's not their own, into it?
That could be part of it. I think one of the main sources of opposition I really heard was just the idea that is raising taxes for people. And even if you're not one of the highest earners, this would impact people who are filing over $500,000 on their personal income tax as a single filer, or over $1 million if they're a joint filer. That message that people didn't want higher taxes really resonated with a lot of people. Something else that I heard is a lot of small businesses file their taxes through the through the individual income tax. Excuse me. So even though you yourself may not necessarily be bringing home $500,000, people were concerned that, if my business brings in over $500,000, I'm still paying this extra surcharge on my taxes. And I think that was a concern. And, this is a tale as old as time, where people don't necessarily want to see higher taxes regardless of their income level, because I think a lot of people either think they're going to make more money in the future or aspire to make more money in the future, and they don't want to be affected by that. I think that's just one part of it, if you ask my personal take.
Sure. So in other words, there are enough folks who are saying, no, I don't want to eat the rich because I hope one day to join those ranks. I'm not trying to demonize folks who are making money at above a certain threshold. Not to say that Invest in My Kids was trying to demonize anyone, but something else that you mentioned, Colin, was that we did not see Governor Whitmer throwing her weight behind some of these campaigns, including the minimum wage campaign. Do you think that affected its outcome?
Well, when we talk about the minimum wage campaign, that itself faced, its own unique set of circumstances. One Fair Wage has been organizing in Michigan for years now, if not a decade. And they've been trying to raise the minimum wage multiple times. They've tried for multiple years to get on the ballot initiative, most famously probably in 2018, which really set a whole chain reaction in motion that led to this point where they're trying to get this referendum on the ballot this year. And without getting into too many boring details, in 2018, they had raised signatures to get on the ballot. The then Republican legislature used a maneuver called Adopt and Amend to basically block that from going before voters by putting the measure into law before it could go before voters. And then they amended it themselves and weakened it substantially. And because of that, that led to a lawsuit that was finally resolved a couple years ago. And One Fair Wage campaign won. After some delays, the courts eventually set a February last year deadline for the original ballot initiative to take effect as it was originally intended, just with new dollar amounts. And the impact of that would have been the minimum wage would basically just jump for everyone overnight. And that freaked out businesses, that freaked out the hospitality industry, and they organized very well. To their credit, they brought a bunch of restaurant workers, service industry workers to the state capitol, saying that this would be the end of tips. And, they really painted this picture of absolute disaster and chaos in Michigan should the original One Fair Wage law go into effect as it was originally intended. And through that campaign, you really saw this strong organizing effort from the service industry. but you in the hospitality industry, but you didn't see that same level of organizing or that same energy matched from one fair wage. So when it came down to passing a bill to, change that and, not necessarily weaken it, but just try to find a compromise between what the original one fair wage petition would have gotten and what the business industries wanted, uh, you that resulted in Michigan's minimum wage law that passed in February 2021. And with that minimum wage law, you have one fair wage really being frustrated because it no longer would create a parity. At most, I think tipped workers their minimum wage would be half of what everyone else makes. And they were upset with that. Hence the referendum campaign to undo those changes. But again, referendum campaigns, you don't have a lot of time. That's the earliest deadline. Referendums are due within 90 days of legislative session adjourning. So that would have been Monday. They have the lowest signature threshold. It's 223,000 signatures and some change. But when you really don't necessarily have that presence in the state for over a year, it's hard to start back up, especially when they did this big launch this past winter. And that gives you about 3 months to gather quite a few number of signatures. And they say they're pros in gathering signatures, but you can only do so much in so little time.
Colin, I'm hearing a common denominator both with Invest in My Kids and with the One Fair Wage campaign, and that is if you don't have the support of the business community, if you're seeing some major skepticism from business leaders, you're going to have a tough time getting your ballot initiative to be successful.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. You're going to need some sort of support in one way, shape, or form. Even doing this with popular support, yes, like if you have enough popular support from the lawmakers, you can get around the business communities. And when we talk about the last surviving left of center business measure, which to be fair, like there's some similar bills to this in the Michigan House, and they do have at least some level of bipartisan support.
You're talking about to get dark money out of politics.
Exactly, to stop some public contractors, public utilities,
DT
state contractors.
Energy from
Exactly.
contributing a lot of money to state lawmakers' pockets.
Yes, there is a certain level of bipartisan support there. You're not going to get the large money support there because it's directly against the large money interests. But I think to a certain level, like it's going to take a lot of political will. It's going to take a lot of support from major people in office to get this across the finish line. It's going to take a lot of visibility. And again, if you don't necessarily have the same amount of finances, you're going to need a lot of volunteers. And now you have multiple campaigns saying they're throwing their support behind your effort. Those signatures are due at some point in May. And again, there's a lower signature threshold here. But 356,000 signatures, around 357,000 signatures is still a lot of work to do.
I mean, okay, we're talking about a lot of the details here, getting into the nitty-gritty of why some of these ballot initiatives backed by liberals failed. I do want to step back and reflect on one of the most incredible ballot initiatives in Michigan history, and that is an objective assessment, I'd say. I mean, this is because of how many people were organized behind it, and I'm talking about Voters Not Politicians, and that is the initiative that ended gerrymandering in the state. Why did that campaign go so well?
I think that they were building this for a long time. It's something that, they have been talking about for a long time. They have been laying the groundwork. They've been laying the political organizing. They had support from in-state as well as national organizations. I think that it was something where they laid out a specific problem that people were tired of seeing. And, they did the whole campaign where they were making fun of, Michigan's, like the weird shapes that you got from Michigan's maps, et cetera. And I think that it also came about at the right time when we were seeing a country where we thought, having a neutral board, drawing these maps would create a better political system, a better political society. And I think that's some of the reasons why we saw that campaign in particular see so much success.
Of course, there are some conservative-led ballot initiatives that I would be remiss not to mention in this conversation, Colin. I mean, those include Americans for Citizen Voting, which would stop people who don't have photo IDs from voting, and then Axe My Tax, which would get rid of property taxes in Michigan. So I want to start with the first, Americans for Citizen Voting, which turned in 750,000 signatures to the state at the beginning of this month, which means it's likely going to be on the ballot. What's the likelihood that it passes in November?
I'm hesitant to say anything yet until we see the signatures counted, and that might not happen until some point this spring. Although the campaign itself would like the Secretary of State and Bureau of Elections to start going through those signatures soon. But 750,000 signatures is a strong signature goal. A lot of the campaigns I've talked to had a goal of around that, if not fewer. So the fact that they were able to get those 750,000 signatures, I think, says a lot about its possibility of getting on the ballot.
What about Axe My Tax? Do you know where things are at with that?
Axe My Tax. So the last time I was able to speak with their executive director was about a month ago in February. She said, they had around 2,500 people volunteering with the campaign. This was not a large moneyed effort. I just want to point that out. It's something that Carla Wagner, the executive director of that group, she has been pushing for years. This has been a project she has wanted to see for years, and she has wanted to see the conversation around property taxes in Michigan changed for a long time. At no point in this did she raise massive amounts of money. When I was looking through the campaign finance statements, I think at most, I don't think there was ever more than $20,000 in the campaign account. So this really was a volunteer effort. She said she was, a month ago when I had talked to her, she said she was still getting back petitions, and she was waiting to see. And if she didn't make it to the ballot this time around, she would try again in 2028. That being said, we are seeing a lot more Republican candidates, especially for governor, embrace this idea of getting rid of property tax altogether, or at least significantly lowering certain types of property taxes we pay here in Michigan.
Okay, so we got to end here on thinking about these conservative-led initiatives and the several liberal-led ones that failed, with one essentially still swimming, still fighting, still treading water. Are liberals and Democrats just tired now and needing new leadership? I mean, in other words, how much of these ballot campaign successes and failures speak to the political wins of the moment? Wins, not win as in win or loss, but wins that we feel on our face.
Yeah, we're seeing these ballot campaigns blow with the wind. I think an issue here is, again, that level of unity and organization. If you look back to 2022, when you saw these big Democratic successes and left of center successes, you saw something where progressives were on the same page as the moderates. This time around, I don't think that's happening, where the moderates are not necessarily the ones full-throated saying, let's get some of these utilities, let's keep the utilities from donating to Michigan political campaigns. These moderates are not necessarily the ones saying, let's raise taxes on people making over $500,000 a year as a single filer or $1 million as a joint filer. And that's not to say we can't get to that point. I'm just saying we didn't see that support this time around, and I think that mattered.
Colin Jackson, Capitol reporter for the Michigan Public Radio Network. Colin, thanks for stopping by, and thanks for your reporting.
Thanks for having me.
It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. Up next, Mayor Mary Sheffield's first budget promises a lot. Free bus rides for kids, higher pay for drivers, and new offices for seniors and homelessness. But the city has $34 million fewer dollars to work with. Detroit documenters have been in the room for all 47 budget hearings. We'll find out what they're seeing. Stay with us.